They say an omega broken is an omega defeated. They were wrong. Because the woman who crawled bleeding through the frost that night, cast out like refuse from her own pack, would return as something far more dangerous than any alpha could imagine. She would become the chain that binds, the shadow that haunts, the queen who kneels to no one. This is not a story of survival. This is a story of vengeance so absolute, it would rewrite the very laws of the wild. And it begins with betrayal so cruel. Even the moon turned her face away in shame. The winter wind howled through the pine forests of old Denmark like the wailing of forgotten gods. In the heart of those ancient woods stood Ravensburg, the stronghold of the Silverclaw pack, where alphas ruled with iron fists and omegas existed at the mercy of hierarchy. It was a world of blood oaths and moon bonds, where your rank determined your worth, and to be omega was to be powerless. Thyra knew this truth better than most. She had been born under an ill-favored moon, her mother dying in childbirth, her father lost to a border skirmish before she could walk. The pack raised her as they raised all orphaned omegas, with harsh discipline and little affection. She learned early to make herself small, to lower her eyes, to survive in the shadows of those deemed her betters. But Thyra possessed something rare among omegas. She could read the old runes, the ancient script carved into standing stones throughout the territory. Her grandmother, before madness claimed her, had taught Thyra the forbidden knowledge. The language of the first shifters, the words that predated the pack hierarchy, when wolves ran wild and free without alpha or omega to divide them. The pack elders tolerated this oddity because Thyra made herself useful. She interpreted warnings from boundary stones, deciphered territorial markings from rival packs, and maintained the sacred texts in the pack's ceremonial hall. She was valuable enough to keep alive, powerless enough to never threaten the order of things. Or so they believed. Everything changed the autumn she turned 23, when Alpha Bjorn Silverclaw returned from the northern campaigns. He was everything an alpha should be, towering, golden-haired, with eyes like winter ice and a presence that made even the boldest beta bow their head. He had led raids into rival territories, expanded Silverclaw dominion, and earned glory that would echo through generations. He was also betrothed to Sigrid, the daughter of a neighboring pack's alpha, a union designed to forge alliances and strengthen bloodlines. The wedding was to take place at the next full moon, and the entire pack buzzed with preparation for the festivities. Thyra should have remained invisible during these celebrations. She should have kept to her scrolls and her solitude. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. It happened in the ceremonial hall, 3 nights before the wedding. Thyra was alone, transcribing a newly discovered rune stone's message by candlelight. The words spoke of an ancient binding ritual, a way to tether souls across the veil between wolf and human, between life and death itself. She was so absorbed in her work that she failed to hear footsteps approaching. "You read the old tongue." Thyra's head snapped up, her heart hammering against her ribs. Alpha Bjorn stood in the doorway, his massive frame blocking out the moonlight. Protocol demanded she drop to her knees, bare her neck in submission. But something in his voice, a curiosity rather than command, made her hesitate. "Yes, Alpha," she managed, lowering her gaze. "It is my duty to the pack." He moved closer, and Thyra caught his scent, pine and steel and something wild that made her wolf stir beneath her skin. "Show me." For the next hour, she explained the runes, her nervousness gradually easing as she lost herself in the scholarship she loved. Bjorn listened with surprising intensity, asking questions that revealed a sharp mind beneath the warrior exterior. When she mentioned the soul-binding ritual, his eyes flickered with something she couldn't name. Could such a thing truly work, he asked. Could 2 souls be bound so completely? The texts suggest it was once common before the hierarchy, Thyra replied carefully. But the ritual was lost when the old ways were forbidden. Now we have made bonds, but they are different, weaker. They can be broken by death or rejection, but not a soul binding. "No," she whispered. "A soul binding is eternal, unbreakable, even beyond death." Bjorn was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the ancient words. Then he looked at her, really looked at her, and Thyra felt the weight of that attention like a physical force. "You are not what I expected," he said softly. Before Thyra could respond, voices echoed from outside. Bjorn straightened, the alpha mask sliding back into place. "Speak of this to no one," he commanded, and then he was gone, leaving Thyra alone with her racing heart and the dangerous flutter of hope she knew better than to feel. But he returned the next night. And the night after that. Their conversations remained focused on the runes, on pack history, on the old ways. Yet something else grew between them, something that defied the rigid hierarchy they both knew. Thyra told herself it meant nothing, that he was simply curious about ancient knowledge. She was Omega. He was Alpha. The gulf between them was insurmountable. On the final night before his wedding, Bjorn arrived at the hall after midnight. Thyra had been crying, unable to stop herself from imagining him bound to Sigrid, lost to her forever, even though he had never truly been hers to lose. "Thyra," he said, and the way he spoke her name broke something open inside her chest. "You should not be here, Alpha," she whispered. "Tomorrow you wed." "Tomorrow I bind myself to duty," he replied, moving closer. "Tonight, for these few stolen hours, let me be simply Bjorn." What happened next would haunt Thyra for the rest of her days. He pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, helplessly. For one perfect night, they pretended the hierarchy did not exist. For one night, an Alpha held an Omega as though she were precious, as though she mattered, as though they could somehow forge their own destiny apart from the pack's demands. In the depths of that night, tangled together beneath the ancient tapestries, Bjorn whispered against her hair. "If there were a way, if the soul binding were possible, I would tether myself to you for eternity." Thyra's heart shattered and soared in equal measure. "The ritual is lost," she said. "And even if we found it, the pack would never allow it." "Then we keep it secret," he murmured. "You have the knowledge. Have the will. Bind us, Thyra. Make it so that no matter what tomorrow brings, some part of us will always belong to each other." She should have refused. She should have recognized the impossibility, the danger, the inevitable heartbreak. But she was 23 and in love and desperate for any scrap of permanence in a world that had given her nothing but scraps. So she spoke the ancient words, guided by half-remembered lessons from her grandmother and the text she had studied. She did not know if the ritual would work without the traditional components, without the sacred herbs and the Alpha's blood freely given under a dark moon. But she tried, weaving their souls together with nothing but whispered prayers and desperate hope. When dawn came, Bjorn left her. He had to. The wedding would proceed as planned. Duty would be satisfied. The alliance would be forged. But he pressed one last kiss to her forehead and swore he would find a way for them, somehow, someday. Thyra wanted to believe him. She tried to believe him. She should have known better. The betrayal came swiftly and brutally. Sigrid, it turned out, had suspected her betrothed's distraction. She had set watchers, and those watchers had seen Bjorn slip away to the ceremonial hall night after night. She had not known about Thyra specifically, but she knew there was someone. On the morning of the wedding, while the pack gathered to celebrate, Sigrid's warriors dragged Thyra from her small dwelling. They brought her before the assembled pack, before Bjorn in his ceremonial robes, before Sigrid in her bridal crown. "This Omega has conspired to undermine the Alpha's union," Sigrid declared, her voice ringing across the gathering. "She has used forbidden knowledge to attempt a soul binding, seeking to steal what rightfully belongs to the pack's chosen mate." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Soul bindings were myth, legend, the stuff of old stories. But the accusation alone was damning. Thyra looked to Bjorn, silently begging him to speak, to defend her, to acknowledge what they had shared. He met her gaze for one terrible moment. She saw the conflict there, the pain, the impossible choice before him. Then he looked away. "I know nothing of this Omega's schemes," he said coldly. "If she has practiced forbidden rituals, she must face pack justice." The words struck Thyra like physical blows. She staggered, held upright only by the warriors gripping her arms. He was denying her. Denying them. Choosing duty, choosing power, choosing everything except her. "Please," she whispered, not caring that the whole pack could hear her desperation. "Bjorn, please." But Alpha Bjorn Silverclaw had already turned away, returning his attention to his bride. The pack's justice was swift and merciless. For attempting to bind an alpha without permission, for practicing forbidden rituals, for reaching above her station, Thyra was sentenced to exile. They stripped her of her pack bonds, severing the connections that tied her to Silverclaw. The pain was excruciating, like having her soul flayed open. She screamed until her voice gave out, collapsed to the frozen ground while the pack watched with cold satisfaction. When the ceremonial exile was complete, they cast her beyond the boundary stones with nothing but the clothes on her back. It was winter. The temperature would drop below freezing within hours. Even a healthy wolf would struggle to survive alone in the wilderness without supplies or shelter. A broken, bond-severed Omega had no chance at all. "Let the wild have her," Sigrid pronounced. "Let her bones be a warning to any who forget their place." Thyra crawled forward on hands and knees, unable to shift with her wolf locked away by the severing, unable to do anything but drag herself away from the territory that had been her entire world. Blood from her palms left dark stains on the snow. Her breath came in ragged gasps that turned to white vapor in the frigid air. Behind her, she heard the sounds of celebration beginning anew. Bjorn's wedding would proceed. He would bind himself to Sigrid, lead the Silverclaw pack to greater glory, and forget the foolish Omega who had dared to love him. As darkness crept across her vision and the cold began to numb her battered body, Thyra felt something else stirring in her chest. Not the soul binding, though she could still sense it there, a golden thread connecting her to the alpha who had betrayed her. No, this was something older, darker, colder than the winter winds. This was rage. Pure, crystalline, absolute rage. They thought her broken. They thought her dead. They thought an Omega cast out was an Omega destroyed. They would learn otherwise. If Thyra survived this night, if she somehow clawed her way back from the edge of death, she would become something new. Something the Silverclaw pack would learn to fear. And Bjorn, the alpha who had sworn himself to her before denying her existence. She would make him regret every word, every choice, every moment he had chosen duty over her. The soul binding he had requested would become his prison. She would be the key, the chain, the shadow he could never escape. She would survive. She would grow strong. She would return. And she would teach an alpha what it meant to betray an Omega with nothing left to lose. Thyra should have died that night. By every law of nature and pack society, an exiled Omega without her wolf, without supplies, without hope, should have frozen in the wilderness and been forgotten. But rage is a powerful fuel, and Thyra's rage burned hotter than any fire. She crawled until her hands bled, then crawled some more. When she could no longer move forward, she scraped snow over herself for insulation and waited for dawn. Her body shook with violent shivers. Her lips turned blue. But she did not die. As the first light of morning broke across the frost-covered landscape, Thyra forced herself to assess her situation with cold logic. Emotion had gotten her into this disaster. Emotion would not get her out. She was beyond Silverclaw territory, which meant she was in the wild lands between pack domains. These forests were home to outcasts, rogues, and creatures that even packs feared to face. Without her wolf she was prey. But she had one advantage: her knowledge of the old ways. Using every scrap of wilderness lore her grandmother had taught her, Thyra survived that first day. She found a hollow tree for shelter, gathered pine needles for insulation, and located a frozen stream where she could break through ice for water. Food was harder. Her human form lacked the strength for hunting, and winter had stripped most plants of edible value. But Thyra did not need to thrive. She only needed to survive long enough to heal, to plan, to prepare her revenge. Days blurred into weeks. The bond severing began to heal, slowly, agonizingly. And as it healed, Thyra felt her wolf stirring again, damaged but not destroyed. The pack had tried to cut her off from her other half, but they had not succeeded completely. She was Omega, yes, but she was also survivor. During those long, frozen nights, Thyra felt the soul binding she had forged with Bjorn. It pulsed like a second heartbeat in her chest, letting her sense his emotions even across the distance. She felt his satisfaction on his wedding night, his pride as he consummated his union with Sigrid, his contentment as he settled into his role as mated alpha. Each feeling was a knife to her heart, and each knife carved away another piece of the naive girl who had loved him, replacing her with something harder, sharper, more dangerous. On the first full moon after her exile, Thyra managed her first shift since the severing. It was agony. Her wolf emerged twisted by pain and rage, smaller than she had been, scarred by what they had endured. But she was there. They were whole, if not unbroken. And that night, running alone under the cold moon, Thyra made a vow. She would master the old ways completely. She would become what the ancient texts spoke of, a rune singer, a spell weaver, a wolf who could command the wild itself. The packs had abandoned these arts in favor of brute strength and hierarchy. But Thyra would reclaim them. She would become powerful enough that no alpha could ever harm her again. And then she would return to destroy the one who had. Fortune, for once, favored her. Deep in the wild lands, Thyra discovered something the packs had long forgotten. The ruins of an ancient settlement, one of the first shifter communities in Denmark. The standing stones still stood, covered in runes that made her heart race with recognition. And in a sealed chamber beneath the largest stone, she found what she needed. Scrolls. Ancient knowledge preserved through centuries. The original texts that described not just the soul binding she had attempted, but dozens of other rituals. Ways to command beasts, to speak with the earth, to draw power from the wild places the packs had abandoned. All the forbidden knowledge the hierarchy had suppressed because it threatened their control. Thyra devoured every word. She learned that the soul binding she had performed was incomplete, missing key components that would have made it symmetrical. As it stood, she could feel Bjorn's emotions, but the binding gave her something more, a claim on his soul. With the right ritual, performed under the right conditions, she could pull on that binding. She could compel him, command him, make the mighty Alpha bow to the will of the Omega he had cast aside. The irony was delicious. Bjorn had asked for the binding himself, never imagining it would become the instrument of his downfall. But Thyra needed more than magical power. She needed allies, resources, and strength. For that, she would have to venture deeper into the wild lands, to seek out the outcasts and rogues who might join her cause. The wild court they called themselves. Wolves who had left or been cast out from their packs, who had banded together in loose coalition rather than rigid hierarchy. They had no alpha, no omega, no betas. They simply were. Wolves, free and feral, surviving by tooth and claw and cunning. Thyra found them in the heart of the ancient forest, in a settlement built around the ruins of an old hall. There were perhaps 50 wolves there, all hardened by survival, all suspicious of strangers. When she walked into their gathering space, every eye turned to her with predatory interest. "I seek an audience with the wild court," she announced, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. A woman stepped forward, tall and rangy, with scars crossing her face and a calculating look in her amber eyes. "We are the wild court," she said. "What does a pack wolf want with us?" "I am no longer pack," Thyra replied. "I am exiled, severed, cast out to die. Yet you live." The woman, whose name she would learn was Runa, circled Thyra like a predator assessing prey. "That alone is remarkable. But why come here? What do you offer the wild court?" Thyra met her gaze without flinching. "Knowledge, power, and vengeance against the pack system that has oppressed us all." Interest flickered across multiple faces. Runa's eyes narrowed. Bold words for a starved Omega barely clinging to life. "I am Omega by birth, not by choice," Thyra replied. "And I have learned the old ways, the forbidden arts the packs fear. I can teach you to be more than survivors. I can teach you to be conquerors." Silence fell over the gathering. Then Runa threw back her head and laughed, a sound both delighted and dangerous. You have fire, little Omega. Very well. Show us what you can do. If you survive our trials, we will listen to your proposal. If you fail, we will add your bones to the forest floor. What followed were 3 days of brutal testing. Thyra had to fight, not against the stronger wolves, but against the wilderness itself. She was left alone in the deep forest with nothing but a knife and told to survive 3 days and nights while the wild court hunted her for sport. She used every trick she had learned, every rune, every scrap of old magic. She laid false trails, created diversions, and when cornered on the 3rd night, she spoke words of power that made the very trees bend to block her pursuers. The wild court wolves stared in shock as branches wove together into an impenetrable barrier, as the forest itself responded to Thyra's will. When she emerged on the 4th morning and walked calmly back to their settlement, she was no longer a desperate exile. She was something new, something they had not seen in generations. Runa met her with respect this time. You command the wild itself. How? The old ways, Thyra replied simply. The magic our ancestors knew before the hierarchy divided us into Alpha and Omega, before we forgot what we truly were. I can teach you if you are willing to learn. Thus began Thyra's transformation from exile to leader. She taught the wild court the rune magic, the earth songs, the beast speaking. In return, they taught her to fight, to hunt, to lead. She was still smaller than most, still bore the scars of her severing. But power she learned came in many forms. Months passed, a year, then another. Thyra grew from a desperate survivor into something formidable. The wild court, under her guidance, began to thrive rather than merely survive. They learned to work with the land instead of against it, to harvest its power, to become more than the packs ever imagined possible. And all the while, through the soul binding, Thyra felt Bjorn's life proceeding without her. She felt his contentment curdle into frustration as Sigrid failed to give him an heir. She felt his growing restlessness as pack politics chafed at his warrior spirit. She felt the slow erosion of his happiness as duty piled upon duty, crushing the man beneath the weight of being alpha. Good, she thought each time she sensed his discontent. Let him choke on the choices he made. Let him drown in the life he chose over me. But vengeance required the right moment. Thyra was patient. She could wait. During the 3rd year of her exile, Runa brought her troubling news. The packs are expanding their territories, she said. Silverclaw especially. They have absorbed 2 smaller packs and are pushing into the wild lands. If they continue, they will find us within 6 months. Thyra felt a cold smile curve her lips. Then perhaps it is time we reminded them why the wild lands are forbidden. She gathered the wild court's warriors, nearly 200 strong now, as others had joined their ranks. She stood before them in the ruins of the ancient hall, and she spoke with the voice of prophecy. The packs believe strength comes from hierarchy, she declared. They believe that alphas must dominate and omegas must submit. But they have forgotten the oldest truth. The wild recognizes no hierarchy. The wild respects only power, cunning, and the courage to seize your destiny with both hands. Her voice rose, carrying across the assembled wolves. I was cast out for daring to love above my station, for practicing the old ways, for refusing to accept that my blood determined my worth. They meant to kill me with that exile. Instead, they freed me. She raised her hands, and the runes carved into the hall's stones began to glow with ethereal light. The wolves gasped as power crackled through the air, as the ancient magic responded to her call. I have learned what the packs feared to remember, Thyra continued. And I have bound an alpha's soul to mine, a chain he does not know he wears. When the Silverclaw pack comes to our borders, we will show them what happens when you underestimate an Omega's rage. Runa stepped forward, her eyes shining with fierce pride. What do you need from us, Rune Singer? Thyra smiled, and it was a smile that would have made her enemy's blood run cold. Help me prepare a welcome for Alpha Bjorn Silverclaw. It is time he learned that some bonds cannot be broken by betrayal, and some vengeance is worth waiting for. The wild court roared their approval, and in that moment, Thyra felt the final piece of her old self fall away. The naive Omega who had loved an Alpha was gone forever, replaced by something the packs would learn to fear. The Exile had become the queen of the wild. And she was coming home. Word reached Silverclaw territory that something strange was happening in the wild lands. Hunters who ventured too far into the forest spoke of wolves who moved like shadows, who could command beasts and make trees bend to their will. They spoke of a woman who led them, a woman with dark hair and darker eyes, who wore the old runes carved into her very skin. Alpha Bjorn dismissed these reports as superstition and rumor. The wild lands had always been home to rogues and outcasts. They posed no real threat to an established pack. He was wrong. The first attack came at dawn, swift and surgical. A Silverclaw patrol vanished from the northern border, leaving behind only tracks that led into the deep forest and disappeared. Search parties found nothing. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just absence where there should have been 5 wolves. The second attack took a hunting party of 7. This time there were signs, ritualistic markings carved into trees, runes that pulsed with faint light, and a message scratched into stone in the old tongue. Bjorn himself came to read it, his face paling as he recognized the script. "What does it say?" Sigrid demanded. "The wild remembers what the packs forgot," he translated slowly. "And the exiled return to claim what was stolen." Fear rippled through the pack. Exiled return. But exile was meant to be death. No one survived the wild lands alone. Bjorn felt something else. A tugging sensation in his chest, a phantom pain he had learned to ignore over the years. The feeling had started shortly after his wedding, a strange awareness of emotions that were not his own. He had convinced himself it was guilt, the natural consequence of what he had done to Thyra. He never imagined it might be something more. The attacks escalated. Silverclaw's borders were breached again and again, always by wolves who struck like ghosts and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. They did not kill without cause, which made it worse. They took prisoners, stole supplies, and left their mocking messages in the old tongue. Each raid was a humiliation, proof that the mighty Silverclaw pack could not protect its own territory. The other packs began to murmur. Alpha Bjorn's leadership was being questioned. Sigrid, still childless after 5 years of marriage, faced her own criticism. The alliance that was supposed to strengthen both packs was beginning to fracture under the strain of constant attacks. Desperate, Bjorn called a council of his most trusted advisors. They gathered in the ceremonial hall, the same hall where he had once met with Thyra in secret, and debated their options. "We should mount a full assault into the wild lands," suggested Agner, his war chief. "Take the fight to these rogues before they grow bolder." "The wild lands are vast," Sigrid countered. "We would be fighting on unfamiliar ground against enemies who know every tree and stone. It would be a slaughter." "Then we strengthen our borders," offered another advisor. "Pull our patrols inward, fortify our positions, and appear weak before the other packs." Bjorn shook his head. "No. We need to understand who leads these attacks and what they want. The messages suggest someone with knowledge of our pack, someone who speaks the old tongue." Cold silence fell. There were few in Silverclaw who could read the ancient runes. Most were elders who rarely left the pack center, and one who had been cast out 5 years ago. "It cannot be," Sigrid said, though her voice lacked conviction. "The Omega died. No one could survive exile without pack bonds." But Bjorn felt the tugging in his chest grow stronger, more insistent. For the first time, he allowed himself to truly examine that sensation. It was not guilt. It was something else, something that felt like a golden thread connecting him to something distant, something powerful, something filled with rage. "Send a messenger," he said abruptly. "Under flag of truce. I will meet with whoever leads the wild court and hear their terms." His advisors erupted in protest, but Bjorn silenced them with a gesture. He was Alpha. His word was law. And deep in his bones, he knew that this confrontation had been inevitable from the moment he had denied Thyra before the pack. The soul binding, he realized with dawning horror. She had succeeded. And he had been too blind to understand what that meant. The messenger returned 3 days later with a simple response. Alpha Bjorn would come alone to the standing stones at the border of the wild lands at the next new moon. He would come unarmed, unaccompanied, and prepared to answer for his crimes. "It is a trap," Sigrid said flatly. "They will kill you the moment you step beyond our borders." "Perhaps," Bjorn agreed. "But if I do not go, the attacks will continue until Silverclaw is bled dry. And I suspect whoever leads the Wild Court wants me specifically, not the pack. This is personal." He did not tell them about the soul binding. He did not tell them that he could feel her now, calling to him across the distance like a lodestone pulling iron. He did not tell them that part of him wanted to go, needed to go, as though his very soul would splinter if he refused. On the night of the new moon, Bjorn shifted into his wolf form and ran alone through the forest. He crossed the boundary stones, feeling the prickle of old magic as he entered the wild lands proper. The forest seemed to watch him, ancient and aware, judging his every step. When he reached the standing stones, he found them already occupied. A woman stood in the center of the stone circle, her back to him, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She wore leathers marked with runes that glowed faintly in the darkness. Around the circle's perimeter, dozens of wolves watched from the shadows, their eyes reflecting moonlight. Bjorn shifted to human form, suddenly feeling vulnerable despite his alpha strength. "I came as requested," he called out. "Show yourself." The woman turned, and Bjorn's breath caught in his throat. Thyra. But not the Thyra he remembered. That woman had been soft, gentle, deferent. This woman stood like a warrior, her eyes hard as stone, her presence radiating power that made his wolf whine in confusion. The scars of her severing were visible on her arms, but instead of marking her as broken, they seemed like badges of honor. And the runes, he realized, were not just painted on her clothing. They were carved into her skin, glowing with active magic. "Hello, Bjorn," she said, and her voice was cold as winter frost. "Thank you for accepting my invitation." He took a step forward, some foolish part of him wanting to reach for her, to explain, to somehow make right what he had done. "Thyra, Alpha Bjorn Silverclaw," she interrupted, her tone formal and cutting. "You stand accused of treachery, betrayal, and breaking a sacred soul binding. How do you plead?" The words struck him like blows. "I did not know the binding would work," he said, hating how defensive he sounded. "I thought it was legend. I never meant." "You never meant." Thyra's laugh was bitter. "You asked me to bind our souls, swore yourself to me for eternity, then denied my existence and cast me out to die. What part of that was unintentional?" Bjorn felt the weight of his choices crushing down on him. "I had duties. The pack needed the alliance with Sigrid's family. I could not choose me over your precious hierarchy," Thyra finished. "Could not imagine that an Omega might matter more than political advantage. Could not conceive that your duty to someone who loved you might outweigh your duty to tradition." She moved closer, and Bjorn felt the soul-binding flare to life between them, that golden thread pulling taut. For the first time he truly felt it, understood what she had created. Their souls were bound, intertwined, inseparable. "Do you feel it now?" Thyra asked softly, dangerously. "The chain you asked me to forge has been there all along, Bjorn. Every moment of your comfortable life I was there, feeling your contentment while I froze in the wilderness, sensing your satisfaction while I learned to hunt my own food, sharing your happiness while I carved runes into my flesh to survive." Horror flooded through him. "I did not know. Thyra, please, I never wanted." "What you wanted ceased to matter the moment you chose duty over truth," she snapped. "But the soul binding works both ways, as you are about to learn. You can feel me now, cannot you? You felt me calling across the distance. That is why you came alone, despite knowing it might be a trap. The binding compels truth between us, even when we wish to lie." She raised her hand, and the runes on her skin blazed with light. Bjorn gasped as power surged through the soul binding, as Thyra's will pressed against his own. His wolf tried to resist, but the binding was older and deeper than instinct. "Kneel," Thyra commanded. Bjorn's body moved without his permission. He sank to his knees in the center of the stone circle, his alpha pride screaming in protest, his mind reeling with the impossibility of it. An Omega could not command an alpha. It was against every law of nature. Except Thyra was no longer just Omega. She was something the packs had forgotten could exist. A rune singer, a wild caller, a wolf who drew power from older sources than hierarchy. "This is what you created," Thyra said, looking down at him with those hard, beautiful eyes. "When you asked me to bind us, you gave me a claim on your soul. You may be Alpha of Silverclaw, but your soul answers to me. And I have spent 5 years learning exactly what that means." Terror and something else, something almost like relief, warred in Bjorn's chest. "What do you want?" he managed. "Justice," Thyra replied simply. "Revenge. And everything you took from me when you cast me out." She gestured, and wolves emerged from the shadows, dozens of them, all watching their alpha kneel before an exiled Omega. Bjorn recognized the humiliation, understood that this was his punishment mirroring hers. She had been brought low before the pack. Now he would be brought low before the wild court. "You have a choice," Thyra continued. "You can return to Silverclaw, tell them you negotiated peace with the wild court, and live the rest of your life knowing that your soul belongs to me. I will pull on the binding whenever I choose, remind you of what you did, ensure you never forget the Omega you betrayed. Every moment of happiness will be shadowed by my presence. Every achievement will taste of ash because you will feel my judgment through our bond." She paused, letting the weight of that future settle over him. "Or you can break your pack bonds, leave Silverclaw behind, and join the wild court. Submit to me as you once demanded I submit to you. Become what I was. Powerless, dependent, surviving on the mercy of someone who holds your fate in their hands." Bjorn's mind raced. Both options were impossible. Return to Silverclaw and live as a puppet, knowing that at any moment Thyra could pull on the soul binding and bring him to his knees. Or abandon everything he had built, everyone who depended on him, to serve the woman he had wronged. "There must be another way," he said desperately. "Thyra, please. I know I hurt you. I know what I did was unforgivable. But the pack, Sigrid, my duties, are not my concern," Thyra cut him off. "You chose those duties over me. Now you must live with the consequences. Choose, Bjorn. Your soul already belongs to me. The question is whether you have the courage to acknowledge it." Before he could answer, howls echoed through the forest. Not from the wild court wolves, but from the direction of Silverclaw territory. Bjorn's head snapped up, his alpha instincts screaming that something was wrong. Runa emerged from the shadows, her expression grim. "We have a problem. A large force of Silverclaw wolves is approaching, perhaps 50 strong. They did not trust their alpha to negotiate alone." Thyra's jaw tightened, fury flashing across her face. "I offered safe passage. Single combat. They dishonor even that." "It is likely Sigrid's doing," Bjorn said, rising to his feet as the compulsion faded. "She never trusted this meeting. She must have sent warriors to follow me." The wild court wolves began to shift, preparing for battle. But Thyra held up a hand, her eyes calculating. "No. If we fight them here, we become the aggressors. Everything I have built will be painted as rogue violence, and the other packs will unite against us." She turned to Bjorn, and in her eyes he saw not just anger but something more complex. "You want another way? Then prove you deserve one. Stop your warriors before they attack. Show me that you can choose truth over convenience, even when it costs you everything." It was a test, Bjorn realized. Perhaps the true test. He could defend his pack, maintain his alpha authority, and return to his comfortable life. Or he could side with Thyra against his own wolves, acknowledge what he had done, and face the consequences. Through the soul binding, he felt her emotions. Rage, yes, but also pain, and underneath it all, the faintest ember of hope that he would finally do the right thing. Bjorn closed his eyes, taking a breath that felt like it might be his last as Alpha of Silverclaw. Then he shifted and ran toward the approaching pack. He met them at the edge of the stone circle. Sigrid was at their head, her eyes blazing with protective fury. "Step aside, Bjorn. We are taking you home." "Stand down," he commanded, using his alpha voice. "This is a negotiation under truce. You dishonor Silverclaw by bringing warriors." "Dishonor?" Sigrid snarled. "They have been attacking our pack for months. They lured you here to kill you. I will not stand by while." "While what?" Bjorn interrupted. "While the woman I betrayed demands justice. While the Omega I cast out to die shows me the consequences of my choices." Shocked silence fell over the gathered Silverclaw wolves. Sigrid stared at him as though he had gone mad. "What are you talking about?" "Thyra lives," Bjorn said, and each word felt like it was being torn from his chest. "The Omega I was accused of binding, the one we exiled 5 years ago. She survived. She leads the Wild Court. And she has every right to her revenge." He felt the soul-binding pulse with Thyra's surprise, felt her shock that he was actually doing this, actually choosing truth even though it would destroy him. "You are under some spell," Sigrid said, but her voice wavered. "The rogues have bewitched you." "No spell," Bjorn replied. "Just the consequences of a ritual I asked her to perform, then denied when it became inconvenient. I am soul-bound to Thyra, have been since the night before our wedding. And I have been a coward for not acknowledging it until now." Agner, the war chief, stepped forward. "Alpha, if you are bound to this woman, your judgment is compromised. You cannot lead the pack while under her influence." "You are right," Bjorn said quietly, and felt his world crumbling even as a strange relief flooded through him. "I cannot lead while bound to another. By the laws of our pack I must step down." Gasps rippled through the assembled wolves. Sigrid's face went white. "You cannot. The pack needs you. Our alliance depends on you." "The pack needs an alpha who is free to lead," Bjorn corrected. "I am not that alpha. Not anymore. Perhaps I never truly was." He turned back toward the stone circle, where Thyra stood watching with an expression he could not read. "You wanted me to choose. Choose truth. I choose to acknowledge what I did and face the consequences. I will step down as Alpha of Silverclaw. My soul is bound to yours, and I will no longer pretend otherwise." For a long moment Thyra said nothing. Then, slowly, she walked forward until she stood face to face with him. The Silverclaw wolves tensed, but she ignored them, her attention focused solely on Bjorn. "Do you understand what you are giving up?" she asked softly. "Everything," he replied. "But I should have given it up 5 years ago before I caused so much damage. Before I broke you." "You did not break me," Thyra said, and there was steel in her voice. "You shattered the naive girl I was, and from those shards I forged something stronger. I am not the Omega who loved you, Bjorn. That woman died in the wilderness. I am what survived her death." "I know," he whispered. "And I am sorry. For all of it. For being too weak to choose you, for valuing duty over love, for casting you out rather than facing the consequences of my choices. I was a coward then. Let me be brave now, even if it is far too late." Through the soul binding, emotions swirled too complex to name. Thyra's rage had not disappeared, but it was joined by something else, something that might, in time, become understanding if not forgiveness. "Very well," she said finally. "You may return to Silverclaw to formally abdicate and ensure the transition of power. But know this. You are soul-bound to me. Where I go, you go. When I call, you come. You are mine, Bjorn Silverclaw, as completely as you wanted me to be yours 5 years ago. Can you live with that?" He met her eyes, those dark, fierce eyes that had seen so much pain and emerged harder but not destroyed, and he knew there was only one answer he could give. "Yes," he said. "I can." I will. Thyra nodded once, then turned to address the Silverclaw wolves. Your alpha has chosen to acknowledge his bond to me. He will return to formalize his abdication. The Wild Court's conflict with Silverclaw ends when he does so. We seek no further violence, only the justice owed to an Omega who was wronged. Go home. Tell your pack what has happened here. The wild lands are no longer forbidden territory. They are sovereign ground, and we will defend them as such. Sigrid looked between Bjorn and Thyra with something like horror. You are throwing away everything for this. For her. No, Bjorn said quietly. I am finally paying the price for throwing her away. There is a difference. The Silverclaw wolves retreated slowly, uncertain, their world turned upside down by their alpha's confession. Sigrid lingered longest, her expression a mixture of betrayal and relief. The marriage had never been happy, both of them trapped by duty. Perhaps she too would find freedom in this ending. When they were gone, Runa approached Thyra with a question in her eyes. You are letting him live. After everything. Death would be mercy, Thyra replied, watching Bjorn with those calculating eyes. I want him to live with what he did. I want him to feel, every day, the bond he created and then tried to deny. I want him to understand what it means to be powerless, to be dependent, to have your fate controlled by someone else's whims. She turned to Bjorn. You have 3 days to settle your affairs in Silverclaw. Then you will return here and begin your new life. You will learn the old ways. You will serve the Wild Court. And you will understand, intimately, what it means to be Omega in a world ruled by power. Bjorn bowed his head in acceptance. It was a harsh sentence, but it was just. He had earned every moment of the humiliation and powerlessness to come. As he turned to leave, Thyra's voice stopped him. Bjorn. He looked back. I will not make this easy for you, she said. But the soul binding works both ways. Your pain is my pain. Your growth is my growth. If you can truly change, truly understand what you did and why it was wrong, then perhaps someday this bond will become something other than punishment. It was not forgiveness. It was not even the promise of forgiveness. But it was possibility, and possibility was more than he deserved. I will try, he said. Every day I will try. Then he shifted and ran back toward Silverclaw, toward the ending of everything he had been and the terrifying unknown of what he might become. Thyra watched him go, feeling the soul binding stretch and flex like a living thing. Runa came to stand beside her. Did you plan this? The Wild Court's war leader asked. I planned his humiliation, Thyra admitted. I wanted him broken as I was broken. But somewhere in the execution, I realized that breaking him would not heal what was broken in me. Vengeance is satisfying, but it is not the same as justice. What is justice, then? Thyra considered the question, feeling the weight of the power she had claimed, the authority she had built, the life she had forged from exile and pain. Justice is him understanding what he did, living with the consequences. And perhaps, if he works hard enough, earning the right to exist in my world without shame. But he will never again have power over me. Never again will I be the Omega who needs his approval to survive. She looked around at the Wild Court, her pack in all but name, her family forged from outcasts and rogues. We have won something more important than vengeance tonight. We have shown the packs that the old hierarchy is not inevitable, that an Omega can command an Alpha, that the wild places have their own power, and those who respect that power can thrive here. Runa grinned, fierce and proud. The packs will not take this lying down. They will see you as a threat. Good, Thyra replied. Let them fear what they have created by casting out those they deemed worthless. Let them wonder what other Omegas, Betas, and outcasts might rise up if given the chance. Let them remember that power is not given by blood but claimed by will. The Wild Court howled their approval, the sound echoing through the ancient forest. And Thyra felt, for the first time since her exile, something that might eventually become peace. She had not forgiven Bjorn. She might never forgive him. But she had taken his power over her and transformed it into her own strength. She had survived exile, mastered forbidden arts, and built a new world where hierarchy mattered less than loyalty, where rank was earned rather than inherited. The Omega who had been cast out was gone. In her place stood the Queen of the Wild, bound to an Alpha's soul but bowing to no one. And that, Thyra thought as the moon rose over the standing stones, was the best revenge of all. 3 days later, Bjorn returned to the stone circle with only the clothes on his back and a small pack of belongings. He had formally abdicated before the full Silverclaw pack, endured their shock and judgment, and watched as Agner took the Alpha's oath in his place. Sigrid had been granted dissolution of their marriage by mutual consent, freeing her to return to her father's pack or seek a new alliance. The look on the pack's faces as he explained the soul binding, as he acknowledged Thyra's survival and his betrayal, would haunt him forever. But it was a necessary haunting. He had earned their contempt. Now he stood before Thyra and the Wild Court, no longer Alpha, no longer anything but a wolf bound by his own choices. "I am here as promised," he said simply. Thyra regarded him with those unreadable dark eyes. She had carved new runes into her arms in the 3 days he had been gone, marking herself with symbols of binding and dominion. They glowed faintly in the dawn light, a reminder of the power she wielded. "Welcome to the Wild Court," she said. "You will live as we live, hunt as we hunt, and obey as all members obey. Your rank means nothing here. Your past means nothing here. You begin as an initiate, the lowest position, and you will earn any advancement through merit alone." Bjorn nodded. He had expected nothing less. "Runa will be your sponsor," Thyra continued. "She will teach you our ways, test your commitment and report on your progress. You will learn to survive without pack bonds, without hierarchy, without the cushion of authority you have relied on all your life." The scarred warrior stepped forward with a grin that promised difficulty ahead. "Can you follow orders, former Alpha?" "I can try," Bjorn replied honestly. "Trying is not good enough in the wild," Runa said. "But we will see if you can learn. Your first lesson begins now." What followed were months of brutal education. Bjorn learned to hunt without the advantage of pack tactics. He learned to forage for food, to read the forest signs, to move silently through terrain that seemed designed to betray him. He learned the rune magic, though it came harder to him than to those born with the gift. He learned to fight without relying on his alpha strength, to use cunning and strategy instead of brute force. And most difficult of all, he learned to obey. Every instinct screamed against it. His wolf raged at taking orders from those he would have outranked in pack society. His pride chafed at performing menial tasks, at being corrected by younger wolves, at sleeping in the common hall rather than in private quarters. But Thyra watched it all through the soul binding, and Bjorn felt her judgment, her assessment, her waiting to see if he would break or adapt. He chose adaptation. Slowly, painfully. He shed the trappings of his old life. He stopped thinking like an alpha and started thinking like a survivor. He made friends among the Wild Court, earned their respect through actions rather than demanding it through rank. He learned their stories. The betas cast out for questioning their alphas, the omegas who had fled abusive packs, the lone wolves who had never fit into the rigid hierarchy. Each story was a mirror showing him the system he had upheld without question, the suffering that hierarchy had caused in the name of order and tradition. And through it all, the soul binding connected him to Thyra. He felt her satisfaction when he succeeded, her disappointment when he stumbled. But more than that, he began to feel her pain, the deep wounds that his betrayal had carved into her soul. He felt the nightmares that still woke her, memories of freezing in the wilderness, of crawling through snow with bleeding hands, of believing she would die alone and forgotten. That shared nightmare was agony. Each glimpse into what she had endured because of his cowardice felt like dying. But he did not pull away from the pain. He let it pour through him, let it teach him what words could never convey. 6 months after his arrival, Runa reported to Thyra that Bjorn had completed his initiate trials. He had survived alone in the deep forest for a week, had successfully contributed to 3 major hunts, and had begun to show real aptitude for rune magic. He is no longer the alpha who arrived here, Runa said. He may never fully shed that training, but he has learned to question it, to see beyond it. I believe he can be trusted. Thyra nodded slowly. She had felt his transformation through the binding, had sensed the fundamental shift in how he saw the world. But trust was not the same as forgiveness. That evening, she called Bjorn to the ancient hall where she studied the old texts. He came immediately, as he always did when summoned, and knelt on the floor before her without being asked. It was habit now, this deference, no longer the forced submission of their first meeting but a choice he made freely. "Rise," Thyra said. "Sit with me." Surprise flickered across his face, but he obeyed, settling across from her with careful respect for her space. "You have done well these 6 months," Thyra said. "Runa reports that you have adapted to our ways. The Wild Court speaks well of you. You have earned a place here." "Thank you," Bjorn said quietly. "Though I know I can never truly earn forgiveness for what I did." "No," Thyra agreed. "Forgiveness is not something you can earn. It is something I may one day choose to give or may not. But that is separate from acknowledgement. You have acknowledged your failures, worked to understand them, and changed your behavior. That is not nothing." She paused, studying his face, seeing the lines that had not been there 6 months ago, the weariness of someone who had looked honestly at themselves and not liked what they found. "The soul binding connects us," she continued. "I feel your sincerity. I know your remorse is genuine. But I also feel your struggle. Part of you still grieves what you lost. The authority, the certainty, the clear hierarchy that told you where you belonged." Bjorn nodded slowly. "I do grieve it. Not because I want to return to it but because it was comfortable. Ignorance is always comfortable. Confronting the harm you have caused, the ways you have been complicit in others' suffering, is exhausting. Every day I see something new that I failed to question before." "That exhaustion is growth," Thyra said. "It is painful but it means you are changing rather than simply performing change. Continue that work. Continue questioning. And perhaps, in time, this bond between us will become something other than punishment and obligation." "What would you want it to become?" Bjorn asked carefully. Thyra considered the question, feeling the soul-binding pulse between them, that golden thread that had survived betrayal and exile and transformation. "I do not know yet. Partnership, perhaps. Mutual respect. We are bound for eternity, whether we wish it or not. We might as well make that bond something bearable." "I would like that," Bjorn said. "More than you know." They sat in silence for a while, not comfortable but not hostile either. Through the binding, emotions flowed back and forth. His gratitude and her cautious hope. His determination and her weary strength. "There is something else we must discuss," Thyra said finally. "The other packs have taken notice of what happened with Silverclaw. Some see it as opportunity, others as threat. We will face challenges in the coming months." "What kind of challenges?" "The kind that come when you disrupt an established order," Thyra replied. "Some alphas will try to attack us before the idea of challenging hierarchy spreads. Others will seek alliance, hoping to use our knowledge for their own gain. And some, I suspect, will send their own outcasts to join us, either as spies or as genuine refugees." Bjorn frowned. "You need better defenses. Strategic planning. Someone who understands how pack alphas think." "Yes," Thyra agreed, watching him carefully. "Which is why I am asking if you would be willing to serve as the Wild Court's strategic advisor. Your knowledge of pack politics and military tactics would be invaluable. But I will only accept if you can do so without trying to recreate the hierarchy here, without falling back into alpha patterns of command." It was a test, Bjorn realized. An offer of trust, but with conditions. She was giving him responsibility while watching to see if he would abuse it. "I can do that," he said. "I can advise without commanding. I have learned that there is strength in collaboration, in listening to many voices rather than demanding one be followed." Let me help protect what you have built here, not as a leader but as a member of the court. Thyra studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Very well. Tomorrow we will meet with the council to discuss our defensive strategies. Your insights will be welcome, as long as they remain insights and not orders. Understood. As Bjorn rose to leave, Thyra's voice stopped him once more. Bjorn. He turned back. Thank you, she said quietly. For choosing truth. For trying to change. For not fighting the soul binding but instead learning to live within it. I know it has not been easy. Nothing worthwhile is easy, he replied. You taught me that, though I was too stupid to learn it until you forced the lesson on me. A ghost of a smile crossed Thyra's face, the first genuine smile he had seen from her since his return. It was small, cautious, but it existed. And through the soul binding, he felt what it cost her to offer even that much softness, how hard she had worked to protect herself from being hurt again. Good night, Thyra, he said gently. Good night, she replied. And for the first time since the night she had been exiled, Thyra felt something other than rage or pain when she thought of Bjorn. It was not forgiveness, not yet. But it was the possibility of it, distant but real. Perhaps that was enough for now. The challenges Thyra had predicted came swiftly. 3 months after Bjorn's integration into the Wild Court, an alliance of northern packs sent emissaries demanding the court disband and its members return to proper pack structure. When Thyra refused, they sent warriors. The battle that followed would become legend among the packs. The Wild Court, outnumbered 2-1, should have been slaughtered. But they fought using tactics the rigid pack structure could not counter. They used the forest itself as a weapon, employing rune magic to confuse and disorient their enemies. They struck from shadows, used guerrilla tactics Bjorn had suggested, and made the northern wolves fight on terrain that favored cunning over strength. Thyra stood at the center of the battle, her runes blazing with power, and spoke words in the old tongue that made the very earth rise up to defend them. Trees bent to create barriers, thorns grew to impossible sizes, and the forest became a living fortress. Bjorn fought beside Runa, using his knowledge of pack tactics to predict enemy movements and position Wild Court forces accordingly. He no longer fought as an alpha seeking glory, but as a member of a team working toward collective survival. And when the northern alpha himself charged toward Thyra, seeking to end the battle by killing its leader, Bjorn threw himself into the path without hesitation. The two alphas clashed with devastating force. But Bjorn was not fighting for dominance or territory. He was fighting to protect something precious, something he had failed to protect once before. That purpose gave him an edge his opponent lacked. When the northern alpha lay defeated, his warriors surrendered. Thyra walked through the battlefield, healing what wounds she could with her knowledge of herbs and rune magic, and when the enemy wolves asked why she showed mercy, she replied simply, "We do not fight to dominate. We fight to be free. If you can accept that freedom, you may leave unharmed. If you cannot, the forest will keep your bones." Every wolf chose to leave. But 3, wounded and abandoned by their pack for losing, asked to stay. Thyra accepted them, as she had accepted all who sought refuge from the hierarchy's cruelty. Word of the battle spread. More outcasts came, seeking the Wild Court's protection. The settlement grew from 50 wolves to 200, then to 300. They built new structures, established trade routes with human villages that bordered the wild lands, and created a society that functioned without the traditional hierarchy. Thyra led not through dominance but through wisdom earned and freely given. She had advisors, including Bjorn, but she listened to voices from all levels of their community. Decisions were made collectively when possible, and when swift action was required, she acted with authority that came from trust rather than fear. As the months turned to years, something remarkable happened. The soul binding between Thyra and Bjorn began to evolve. The chain of punishment slowly transformed into a bridge of understanding. They learned each other's thoughts, anticipated each other's needs, and found that 2 souls intertwined could be stronger than either alone. It was not romance, at least not at first. It was something deeper and more complex, A partnership forged from betrayal and redemption, from exile and transformation, from pain that had been acknowledged rather than buried. 3 years after Bjorn's abdication, Thyra called him to the ancient hall once more. She looked different than she had on the night of their reunion. The hardness in her eyes had softened slightly, tempered by the community she had built and the peace she had begun to find. The scars of her severing still marked her arms, but they no longer seemed like wounds. They had become part of her story, proof of survival rather than symbols of defeat. "I have been thinking about the soul binding," she said without preamble. "About what it has become and what it could yet be." Bjorn settled across from her, patient as he had learned to be. "Tell me. When I performed the ritual 5 years ago, I did so out of love and desperation," Thyra continued. "When you betrayed me, the binding became a weapon I used for revenge. These past 3 years it has been something else. A tool for understanding, a way to ensure honesty between us. But it is still incomplete." She pulled out an ancient text, one of the originals she had found in the ruins. "The full soul-binding ritual requires consent from both parties, freely given without coercion. What we have now was created from my love and your request, but it has never been balanced. You are bound to me, but I am not equally bound to you." Bjorn's heart began to race. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I could complete the binding," Thyra replied quietly. "Make it symmetrical. Give you the same influence over me that I have over you. It would create true equality between us, a partnership bound by magic as well as choice." "Why would you do that?" Bjorn asked, hardly daring to hope. "After everything I did, why would you give me that power?" "Because you have proven yourself worthy of it," Thyra said simply. "Not through grand gestures, but through 3 years of patient work. You have changed, Bjorn. You are not the man who cast me out. And I am not the woman who loved that man. But we could be something new together. Something neither of us could be alone." She met his eyes, and in them he saw vulnerability he had not seen since the night before his wedding, when she had been young and naive and willing to believe they could defy the pack hierarchy. "I am not asking you to love me again," she continued. "I do not know if I can ever love you as I did before. Too much has happened. But I am asking if you would choose this binding freely, if you would commit to this partnership knowing all it would entail. Equal power means equal vulnerability. I would be able to hurt you as you hurt me. Are you brave enough for that?" Bjorn felt tears burning in his eyes. It was the question he had been asking himself for 3 years. Was he brave enough to be truly equal to someone, to surrender control while also accepting responsibility, to partner rather than lead or follow? "Yes," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I choose this binding freely. I choose partnership with you, Thyra. I choose to be vulnerable because that is the only way to be truly strong. I choose you not as my omega or my alpha, but as my equal." Thyra nodded, and he saw her own eyes glisten with unshed tears. "Then we will perform the ritual at the next full moon. All of the wild court will witness it. See what it means to choose your bonds rather than have them forced upon you by blood or hierarchy. We will show them that power shared is power multiplied." The night of the ritual, the wild court gathered in the stone circle where Thyra had once brought Bjorn to his knees. But tonight there would be no domination, no punishment, no revenge. Tonight there would be choice. Thyra and Bjorn stood facing each other in the center of the circle, the ancient texts open before them. The runes carved into the standing stones glowed with awakened power, responding to the magic about to be worked. Runa, serving as witness, spoke the ritual words in the old tongue. Then Thyra began her part, carving new runes into her skin to match the ones on Bjorn's arms, marking herself as bound even as he was bound. "I, Thyra, cast out and reborn, choose to bind my soul to Bjorn's," she said, her voice carrying across the silent gathering. "Not from desperation, not from love, but from respect earned and trust built over time. I give him power over me as he has given me power over him. I make myself vulnerable as he has made himself vulnerable. I choose partnership over dominance, equality over hierarchy, truth over comfort." Then it was Bjorn's turn. I, Bjorn, former Alpha and reborn as simply Bjorn, accept this binding freely. I promise to use the power given me with wisdom and care. I promise to remain vulnerable, to continue growing, to never again choose comfort over truth. I bind myself to Thyra as equal, as partner, as the other half of a whole neither of us could be alone. The magic surged through them both, and for a moment the pain was excruciating. Not the pain of punishment but the pain of transformation. Two souls already connected were now intertwining completely, becoming balanced, becoming whole. When it was done, they stood gasping, hands clasped between them, and through the binding they felt each other's emotions with perfect clarity. Thyra's cautious joy and lingering fear. Bjorn's profound gratitude and determination to be worthy of this gift. The love that existed between them, different from what it had been, deeper and more mature, built on understanding rather than passion. The wild court howled their approval, and the sound echoed through the ancient forest like a declaration to all the packs. This was a new way, a better way, and it was spreading. In the years that followed, the wild court grew into something unprecedented. Other outcasts came, drawn by tales of a place where rank mattered less than contribution, where omegas could lead and alphas could serve, where the old magic was remembered and respected. They established trade agreements with progressive packs, opened schools to teach the rune magic to any who wished to learn, and slowly, gradually, began to change the very concept of what pack society could be. Thyra and Bjorn led together, neither above the other, each contributing their unique strengths. She taught the old ways and maintained the court's connection to the wild places. He used his understanding of pack politics to negotiate with traditional leaders and protect their growing community from those who saw change as threat. They never formally mated, never called each other by the traditional titles. They did not need to. The soul binding made them something beyond mates. True partners, equal in every way that mattered, bound by choice rather than ceremony. And on quiet nights when the work was done and they sat together beneath the stars, Bjorn would sometimes say, "I am sorry. For what I did, for what it took to bring us here. I will always be sorry." And Thyra would reply, "I know. And I have forgiven you though it took years. But I am not sorry for what I became because of it. I am not sorry for the wild court, for the outcasts we have saved, for the change we have begun. Perhaps we needed the betrayal to forge something stronger than what we were. Perhaps," Bjorn would agree. "But I wish the cost had not been so high." "All transformations have costs," Thyra would say. "The question is whether we learn from them or let them destroy us. We chose to learn. That makes all the difference." And it did make a difference. The wild court became a beacon for those who suffered under the traditional hierarchy. Young omegas who faced abuse found sanctuary there. Betas tired of being caught between alpha dominance and omega submission discovered a place where they could simply be. Even some alphas, recognizing the toxicity of a system that demanded constant dominance, came seeking a better way. Not all the packs accepted this change. Some doubled down on tradition, tightening their hierarchical structures in response to what they saw as dangerous rebellion. But others, seeing the prosperity and peace of the wild court, began to question whether the old ways were truly the only ways. 5 years after Bjorn's abdication, representatives from 7 different packs came to the stone circle seeking an audience. They were not warriors but scholars, healers, and advisors who had seen enough suffering under rigid hierarchy and wanted to learn alternatives. Thyra received them with dignity and caution. She had not forgotten that packs had tried to destroy the wild court multiple times. But she also recognized opportunity when it presented itself. "You come seeking knowledge," she said to the assembled representatives. "What will you do with it when you return to your packs?" An elderly beta woman, her fur gray with age, stepped forward. "We will teach it to any who wish to learn. We will show our alphas that strength comes in many forms, that wisdom can flow from those the hierarchy deems lesser. We cannot promise revolution, but we can plant seeds of change." "Seeds take time to grow," Thyra replied. "And they require tending. Are you prepared for the resistance you will face? For the alphas who will see education as threat?" "We are," the woman said firmly. Because we have seen what you have built here. A community that thrives without crushing those at the bottom. A system where power is earned through merit rather than inherited through blood. If you can create this from nothing after being cast out to die, then we can surely manage small changes within our established packs. Thyra looked at Bjorn, feeling his thoughts through the soul binding. He nodded slightly. This was the moment they had worked toward. The possibility of changing pack society from within rather than simply offering refuge to those it rejected. Very well, Thyra said. We will teach you the old ways. But understand this. Knowledge is dangerous to those who benefit from ignorance. You may lose your positions, your safety, even your lives for spreading what you learn here. Are you certain this is a price you are willing to pay? Every representative nodded. They had counted the cost and found it worthwhile. And so began the next phase of transformation. The Wild Court became not just a refuge but a school, teaching the rune magic and collaborative governance to any who sought it. Some students returned to their packs and enacted small changes that rippled outward. Others were cast out and joined the Wild Court permanently, strengthening its numbers and diversity. The movement grew slowly, sometimes painfully, with setbacks and tragedies along the way. But it grew nonetheless, because once wolves had seen that another way was possible, they could not unsee it. Once they had tasted equality, hierarchy tasted like poison. 10 years after her exile, Thyra stood at the edge of Wild Court territory and looked out over a landscape transformed. Where once there had been only one settlement of outcasts, now there were 5, each self-governing but united by shared principles. The forest that had nearly killed her had become her kingdom, not through conquest but through respect for its wild nature. Bjorn came to stand beside her. His hair now streaked with premature gray from years of hard work and harder lessons. Through the soul binding, she felt his contentment, his pride in what they had built together, and underneath it all, his ongoing gratitude that she had given him a chance at redemption. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "The exile, the pain, all of it. Do you wish you could go back and prevent it from happening?" Thyra considered the question carefully. "I regret your betrayal," she said honestly. "I regret the naive girl I was, who believed that love could overcome hierarchy. I regret the suffering, the nights I thought I would die, the years of rage that consumed me." She paused, feeling the weight of all those experiences, the way they had shaped her into who she had become. "But I do not regret who I am now," she continued. "I do not regret the Wild Court, the lives we have saved, the changes we have begun. If I could go back and prevent the exile, I would prevent a great deal of pain. But I would also prevent all of this. And I think in the end this was worth the cost. Even the cost of your innocence," Bjorn asked. "Your ability to trust easily, to love without fear." "Even that," Thyra confirmed. "Innocence that cannot survive reality is not worth keeping. Trust that comes from naivety is fragile. Love without understanding is beautiful but shallow. What we have now, what I have become, is stronger than what was lost." She turned to look at him fully. "You taught me that, though not in the way you intended. You taught me that survival requires hardness, that power must be claimed rather than given, that the world will not be kind to those who wait for kindness. Those were harsh lessons, but they were necessary. I wish I had not been the one to teach them," Bjorn said, and through the binding she felt his old grief, softened by time but never entirely healed. "So do I," Thyra agreed. "But you were. And now you teach different lessons. That people can change, that redemption is possible through genuine effort, that those who have been cruel can learn compassion. Those lessons are necessary too." They stood in comfortable silence, 2 souls bound by magic and choice, watching the sun set over the territory they had built from exile and pain. Around them, the Wild Court prepared for the evening meal, voices rising in laughter and conversation, the sounds of a community that had learned to thrive without hierarchy. In the distance, a young Omega named Astrid led a group of new arrivals through the settlement, explaining the rune magic they would learn, the freedoms they would have, the way they could become more than their birth rank suggested. She had been one of the first outcasts to join the Wild Court, cast out by her pack for refusing a forced mating. Now she taught others what Thyra had taught her. That power comes from within, that survival can become sovereignty, that the exiled can become queens. Watching her, Thyra felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This was her true revenge. Not Bjorn's punishment, though that had satisfied something in her, but the creation of a world where what had happened to her could not happen to others. Where omegas were not powerless, where hierarchy was questioned rather than blindly followed, where the wild places were respected rather than feared. "I want to show you something," Bjorn said, pulling a folded parchment from his pack. "A letter came today from Silverclaw. Agner writes that they have begun implementing some of our governance structures. Not completely, but small changes. Omegas are now consulted in pack decisions. Young wolves are taught basic rune magic alongside traditional training. It is not revolution, but it is progress." Thyra took the letter, reading it with growing satisfaction. Silverclaw, the pack that had cast her out, was beginning to change. Not because she had forced them, but because they had seen that another way worked better. "That is more than I dared hope for," she admitted. "When I crawled through the snow that night, I swore vengeance against Silverclaw. I imagined destroying them utterly, making them suffer as they had made me suffer. But this is better. This is lasting." "You have become wise," Bjorn observed. "I have become old," Thyra corrected with a slight smile. "Wisdom is just accumulated scars that taught you not to make the same mistake twice." They returned to the settlement together, walking side by side as equals, their souls intertwined so completely that sometimes it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. That night, they joined the wild court for the communal meal, sitting not at a head table but among the others, part of the community rather than above it. After the meal, as was tradition, stories were shared. Young wolves spoke of their journeys to the wild court, of the packs they had left behind, of their hopes for the future. Veterans told tales of the early days, when survival had been uncertain, when every day had been a battle against cold and hunger and the packs that wanted them dead. And finally, because they asked for it every full moon, Thyra told her story. She told of a naive Omega who had loved an Alpha above her station, of a soul binding performed in secret, meant to create eternal connection, of betrayal so complete it had seemed to destroy her, of exile into winter wilderness with no hope of survival. She told of crawling through snow with bleeding hands, of finding the old ruins, of discovering the forbidden knowledge that would save her life, of Runa and the wild court taking her in, testing her, accepting her, of learning to be more than her rank, more than her pain, more than the broken girl who should have died. She told of Bjorn's return, of bringing him to his knees, of the revenge that had seemed so sweet until she realized that breaking him would not heal what was broken in her, of his choice to acknowledge his betrayal, to change, to become someone worthy of the binding he had requested. And she told of the transformation from revenge to justice, from pain to power, from exile to sovereignty. "I am not the woman I was," she concluded, as she always did. "That woman died in the wilderness. I am what grew from her bones. Harder, stronger, less easily hurt. I do not recommend my path to anyone. But I do recommend the lesson. That you are more than your rank, more than your pain, more than what anyone tells you that you must be. The wild recognizes no hierarchy. Neither should you." The wild court howled their approval as they always did, and the sound carried through the forest like a promise to all who might hear it. Here you are safe. Here you are valued. Here you can become who you were always meant to be. Later, when the fires had burned low and most had retired to their dwellings, Thyra remained at the ancient hall, studying a new text that had been discovered in the ruins. She was so absorbed that she did not notice Bjorn's approach until he spoke. "You should rest," he said gently. "You have been working since before dawn." "There is always more to learn," Thyra replied, but she closed the book nonetheless. "The old ways were vast. I barely understand a fraction of what our ancestors knew." "You understand enough to have changed the world," Bjorn said, settling beside her. "That should count for something." Through the soul binding, Thyra felt his fatigue mirroring her own, the bone-deep weariness of those who have worked hard and long for something they believe in. But she also felt his satisfaction, his peace with the life they had built. "Do you miss it?" she asked suddenly. "Being alpha, having clear authority, undisputed power, the certainty of hierarchy." Bjorn was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Not the power itself, but the simplicity of it. Knowing your place, following the rules that have always existed. There was comfort in that, even if it was the comfort of ignorance." He turned to look at her, his eyes serious. "But I do not wish to go back. The man who was Alpha Bjorn Silverclaw was smaller than the man I have become. He led through fear and tradition. He could not conceive of partnership, only dominance or submission. He threw away the best thing that ever happened to him because he was too cowardly to question the hierarchy he had been raised to uphold." "And who are you now?" Thyra asked, though she could feel the answer through the binding. "I am Bjorn of the Wild Court," he said simply. "Partner to Thyra, advisor to those who seek counsel, student of the old ways, and guardian of a community that values contribution over rank. I am less powerful than I was, but I am more myself." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Thyra replied. "You are who you chose to become rather than who you were born to be. That is the essence of what we teach here." She reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses earned through years of work, the scars from battles fought for something worth fighting for. Through the soul binding, emotions flowed. Her affection for him, complex and hard one, built on foundations of pain but reaching toward something like love. His devotion to her, earned through patience and genuine change, no longer the possessive passion of an alpha but the steady regard of an equal. "We have built something remarkable," Thyra said softly. "From betrayal and exile we have created hope. From a soul binding meant to be eternal torture, we have forged genuine partnership. From hierarchy's refuse, we have made a community that thrives. That is no small achievement." "No," Bjorn agreed. "It is not. And it is largely your achievement, Thyra. You survived what should have killed you. You transformed what should have destroyed you. You took every weapon used against you and made it into a tool for building something better. I merely learned to follow your lead." "You learned to walk beside me," Thyra corrected. "That is different and more difficult. Following is easy. Partnership requires constant negotiation, constant vulnerability, constant choice. You have made those choices every day for 10 years. That is worthy of recognition." They sat together in the ancient hall, surrounded by texts and runes and the weight of history, and felt the soul-binding pulse between them like a living thing. It was no longer a chain or a weapon. It was a bridge, connecting two people who had hurt each other terribly and found a way to build something better from the ruins. Outside, the forest whispered its ancient songs, and the wild court slept peacefully, protected by magic and by the community they had formed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as every day did. There would be packs that threatened them, outcasts who needed sanctuary, lessons to teach and skills to learn. But tonight, in this moment, there was peace. Thyra, once cast out to die, had become queen of the wild. Bjorn, once alpha above all, had become her equal partner. Together, they had proven that the old hierarchy was not inevitable, that change was possible, that even the deepest wounds could heal if tended with honesty and patience. It was not the revenge Thyra had imagined when she crawled through the snow with bleeding hands, swearing oaths of vengeance to the uncaring sky. It was better, because revenge destroys, but justice builds. Revenge satisfies for a moment, but transformation lasts forever. Revenge would have made her a monster, but justice had made her a queen. And in the end, that was the greatest revenge of all, not destroying the alpha who betrayed her, but becoming so much more than he had ever imagined she could be. Not bringing him to his knees through cruelty, but offering him the chance to rise as her equal. Not replicating the hierarchy that had hurt them both, but creating something entirely new. The exiled Omega had returned. But she had not returned for revenge. She had returned to rule. And the wild, ancient and wise, recognized its queen. 20 years after the exile that should have killed her, Thyra stood before the Council of Packs, something that had never before included a representative from the Wild Court. The invitation had come from an unlikely source. Sigrid, Bjorn's former wife, who had become alpha of her father's pack after his death and had implemented many of the Wild Court's governance structures. The council met in neutral territory, a vast clearing where standing stones marked the boundaries of 5 different pack domains. Alphas and their advisors filled the space, representing nearly every significant pack in Denmark. The air crackled with tension and territorial instinct barely held in check. Thyra walked into that clearing alone, though she knew the Wild Court watched from the forest's edge, ready to intervene if needed. She wore leathers marked with runes of protection and sovereignty, her gray-streaked hair braided with beads that told the story of her journey. Bone for death survived, silver for wisdom earned, copper for community built. She was no longer young. The years had carved lines into her face, had left their mark in aching joints and old injuries that predicted weather changes. But age had also brought authority that no one questioned, power that needed no assertion. The alphas watched her approach with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility to grudging respect. She was an anomaly, an impossibility. An omega who commanded without alpha rank, who led without dominating, who had survived exile and built an empire from nothing. Sigrid stepped forward as host of the council. She had aged well, her blonde hair now white at the temples, her bearing that of someone who had learned to lead through wisdom rather than force. Thyra of the Wild Court. You stand before the Council of Packs. State your business. I come with a proposal, Thyra said, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled wolves. For 20 years, the Wild Court has served as refuge for those cast out by the pack system. We have thrived using the old ways, the collaborative governance, the rune magic that packs abandoned in favor of hierarchy. Our community now numbers over 500 wolves, and we control territory equivalent to 2 traditional packs. Murmurs rippled through the gathering. Numbers meant power, and 500 wolves united was a force to be reckoned with. Some of you have sent representatives to learn our ways, Thyra continued. Some have implemented our structures within your own packs. Others have seen us as threat and tried multiple times to destroy us. All of those responses are understandable. We represent change, and change is frightening to those who benefit from the current order. An alpha from the Northern Territories, a massive man named Vigo, stepped forward. You represent chaos. The hierarchy has maintained order for generations. Without clear rank, without alphas to lead and omegas to follow, society collapses into anarchy. Does it? Thyra asked mildly. Because the Wild Court has existed for 2 decades without collapsing. We have fewer conflicts, less violence, better resource distribution, and higher survival rates than most traditional packs. If that is anarchy, perhaps anarchy is preferable to order built on oppression. Vigo's face reddened with anger, but before he could respond, another alpha spoke. This was Ingrid, a younger leader known for progressive policies. What is your proposal, Thyra? You did not come here simply to debate governance philosophy. No, Thyra agreed. I came to propose a formal treaty. The Wild Court will be recognized as sovereign territory, equal in standing to any pack. We will maintain our governance structures, our acceptance of outcasts, and our teaching of the old ways. In exchange, we will enter into trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, and cultural exchange programs with any pack that wishes to participate. Silence fell over the council. It was an audacious proposal, demanding that packs recognize outcasts as equals, validate a system that rejected traditional hierarchy, and legitimize everything the old order stood against. And if we refuse? Vigo demanded. If we decide that your Wild Court is a threat that must be eliminated? Thyra met his gaze without flinching. Then you will try to eliminate us, as others have tried before. And you will fail as they failed. Not because we are stronger than you individually, but because we fight for something worth dying for. Because we know what it means to have nothing and build everything from ashes. Because the wild itself fights alongside those who respect it. She raised her hand, and the runes on her skin glowed with soft light. Around the clearing, the ancient standing stones responded, their own carvings illuminating in sympathetic magic. The effect was stunning, a reminder that the old ways still had power, that the magic Pax had abandoned was not gone but merely waiting. "This is not a threat," Thyra said quietly. "This is a demonstration. The hierarchy is not the only way. The old magic is not lost. And those you cast out as weak may become stronger than you ever imagined. Recognize that truth now, peacefully, or learn it later through bloodshed. The choice is yours." The council erupted into debate. Some alphas argued vehemently against legitimizing the wild court, seeing it as existential threat to their authority. Others, particularly the younger leaders and those who had implemented reforms, spoke in favor of the treaty. The discussion raged for hours, with Thyra standing patient and unmoved at the center, answering questions when asked but never begging for approval. Finally, as the sun began to set, Sigrid called for a vote. It would not be unanimous, she acknowledged, but a majority would be binding on all Pax represented. The vote was close. Several alphas refused outright, declaring they would never recognize outcast authority. But enough others, voted in favor. When the count was complete, the wild court had won recognition by a margin of 2 votes. It was not complete victory. The dissenting Pax would continue to pose threats. But it was legitimacy, acknowledgement that another way was possible, validation for 20 years of hard work and harder sacrifice. As the council disbanded, Sigrid approached Thyra privately. "You did it," she said with something like admiration. "You actually did it. The girl Bjorn cast out has become powerful enough to demand recognition from the Pax that destroyed her." "Not just me," Thyra replied. "Everyone who found their way to the wild court, everyone who built it with me, everyone who believed that change was possible. I am simply the voice for those who had no voice." Sigrid nodded slowly. "I owe you an apology. 20 years late but sincere. I was the one who demanded your exile, who saw you as threat rather than person. I was young and jealous and certain that hierarchy was natural law. I have learned much since then, largely from watching what you built from the ashes of your exile." "Your apology is accepted," Thyra said simply. "You were also a victim of the hierarchy, forced into a marriage you did not want, trapped by duty and expectations. We have all suffered under that system. The question is whether we learn from that suffering." "I have tried," Sigrid replied. "My pack has implemented many of your governance reforms. We consult Omegas in major decisions now. We teach collaborative problem-solving instead of unquestioning obedience. It is not perfect, but it is better than what we were." "Then you have honored the spirit of the treaty before it was even signed," Thyra observed. "That speaks well of your leadership." As Thyra turned to leave, Sigrid called out one more question. "Is he happy, Bjorn, in the wild court with you?" Thyra paused, considering. Through the soul binding, she could feel Bjorn watching from the forest's edge, could sense his pride in what she had accomplished today, his contentment with the life they had built together. "He is at peace," she said finally, "which is more than he ever was as Alpha. We have both found something better than happiness. We have found purpose, partnership, and the satisfaction of building something that will outlast us both." She walked back into the forest, back to the wild court that waited for her, back to Bjorn who met her with an embrace that spoke of 20 years of partnership, of pain transformed into strength, of love that had died and been reborn as something more durable. "How did it go?" he asked, though he could feel her emotions through the binding. "We won recognition," Thyra said. "Not unanimous but enough. The wild court is now officially sovereign territory. Everything we have built is legitimate." Bjorn laughed, the sound joyous and free. "Thyra, everything we built was legitimate from the moment we decided it was. The Pax recognition changes nothing except politics." "Perhaps," Thyra agreed. "But it means the next outcast who finds their way to us will not have to fear immediate attack from traditional Pax. It means the young wolves learning our ways will have options beyond exile or submission. It means we have changed not just ourselves but the world we inhabit. That matters. They walked back to the settlement together, following paths worn smooth by 2 decades of use, passing dwellings where families lived in peace, workshops where the old arts were taught, gathering spaces where decisions were made collectively. The wild court had grown from desperate refuge to thriving community, proof that another way was possible. That evening, as they had done for 20 years, the community gathered for the evening meal. New arrivals sat beside veterans, young beside old, those born Omega beside those born Alpha, all equal in their membership in the court. Stories were shared, plans were made for the next day's work, and laughter rang through the settlement. Thyra looked around at what she had built, at the lives that had been saved and transformed, at the community that functioned without anyone being crushed at the bottom of a hierarchy. She thought about the girl she had been, naive and powerless, cast out to die for daring to love above her station. That girl was long dead. But what had grown from her death was magnificent. Runa, now grey-muzzled and honored as the court's war leader, stood to make an announcement. Today, Thyra secured recognition from the Council of Pacts. The Wild Court is now sovereign territory, legitimate and acknowledged. We are no longer outcasts hoping to be ignored. We are a power that cannot be dismissed. Cheers erupted through the gathering. Wolves who had been exiled, abused, cast aside by the pack system celebrated their validation, their survival, their transformation from victims to victors. When the noise died down, Runa continued. But we must remember, recognition changes nothing about who we are or what we value. We are still the court that accepts all who come seeking refuge. We still teach the old ways, practice collaborative governance, and reject hierarchy in favor of earned respect. Power has not corrupted us because we understand what power truly is. Not dominance, but the capacity to build, to protect, to transform. She turned to Thyra. Our queen has shown us the way. Cast out as weak, she became strong. Exiled to die, she built a kingdom. Bound by a soul she could have used for revenge, she chose justice instead. Let us honor her example not through worship, but through continuing the work. Let us build on this foundation until every wolf in Denmark knows that they have choices, that rank is not destiny, that the exiled can become queens and the wild can become home. The wild court howled their agreement, and the sound carried through the ancient forest like a prophecy being fulfilled. This was what revenge had become. Not destruction but creation, not bringing low but lifting up, not replicating pain but transforming it into purpose. Thyra felt Bjorn's hand slip into hers, felt through the soul binding his overwhelming gratitude for the chance she had given him, the partnership they had forged, the life they had built together from the ruins of his betrayal. Thank you, he whispered, for surviving, for becoming this, for letting me walk beside you. Thank you for being brave enough to change, Thyra replied. For choosing truth over comfort, for surrendering pride to become genuine, for proving that even those who have caused great harm can learn to do better. They stood together before their community, equal partners in a grand experiment, 2 souls bound so completely that sometimes they could not tell where one ended and the other began. The binding that had begun in love and transformed through betrayal into weapon had become, finally, exactly what it was always meant to be. An unbreakable connection between equals, a bridge spanning the gulf between who they had been and who they had become. And in the years that followed, the wild court continued to grow. More outcasts came. More wolves chose freedom over hierarchy. More of the old ways were remembered and reclaimed. Some packs continued to resist, clinging to tradition even as it crumbled around them. But others evolved, adapted, learned that strength came in many forms and governance could be collaborative rather than autocratic. Thyra and Bjorn grew old together, their hair turning white, their bodies marked by age and hard work. They trained successors who would carry on the court's values after they were gone. They wrote down the old knowledge so it would not be lost again. They built institutions that would outlast their founders. And when they finally died, many years after that fateful night of exile, they died as they had lived the last decades of their lives. Together, equal, bound by a soul tie that not even death could sever. The wild court mourned them deeply, celebrated them justly, and then carried on the work they had begun. Because that was the true legacy. Not two people, but an idea that had taken root and spread. The idea that hierarchy was choice, not inevitability. That those cast out as weak could become strong. That the wild places held power for those willing to respect them. That justice was better than revenge, transformation better than destruction, partnership better than dominance. The exiled Omega had become queen. The Alpha had learned humility. Together they had changed the world. And the wild, ancient and wise and patient, continued its eternal song, welcoming all who came to it honestly, teaching those willing to learn, and remembering everything that passed within its boundaries. The story of Thyra and Bjorn became legend, told around fires for generations. Some versions emphasize